Peter Nicol and myself, Howard Longstaff, will chat with people who are influential and involved in the startup arena. Peter, who have we got on today?
Hi everyone, I'm really looking forward to this session. So today, Howard, it's based on our topic of investing. And today we have an amazing guest, very good friend of mine. I'd like to introduce you to John Michaelis. Hi, John.
Hi there, pleased to be here. Good to see you both.
Hi, John.
Hi, Howard.
So John and I first met way back when we were rookie salespeople in the 80s in a data communications company called Thorn EMI Datatech, which is sadly long gone. And just to give you a brief bio, John Michaelis is an angel investor, he's a board advisor, he's an author, and he's the founder of an extremely successful consultancy called WIT. John was also the founding shareholder in a company called Aurora, which I should say that I also invested in, thank you, John, which provided AI solutions to the air sector and where he orchestrated a very successful exit. John published his first book, U++, which is a guide to embracing AI, way back in 2020, when AI was not the most discussed subject on the planet. And I think publishing a book on that subject, many would say that John was ahead of his time. John also founded WIT Consultancy, which had many global programs, and he was selling into organizations or supporting organizations such as Cisco, HSBC, and Vodafone. John, I'm delighted to welcome you to All About Startups podcast series.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So, John, you've travelled a few paths since you and I worked together all those years ago. It's an impressive journey. How did this journey begin?
Well, not with the best of starts. It was when I had to leave school rather unexpectedly 6 weeks into the sixth form with minimal skills and a few O-levels to my name and not really much idea what I could do. Apart from I knew I wanted to have results based on my own efforts. So my first job was selling cash registers to independent retailers on the streets of London, a typical low basic, high commission role, which I did reasonably well in, and that led me onto a path in IT and technology sales.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Do you know what? After all these years, I still didn't know that about you. So you learned so much on this podcast. So, John, going through on this path, how did you eventually become an investor?
So I dabbled with investing when WIT Consultancy was at its height and generating a lot of income for me, extra cash. And there were a couple of friends introduced me to a couple of startups that I invested in, probably quite unknowingly, but I appreciated the tax breaks. It was certainly a good learning curve about the things that can go wrong. And I subsequently became rather more structured about it after the exit from Aurora 5 years ago, when I thought it would be something I would like to crack and have a proper go at in a structured way, as sort of what's possibly the finale to my career.
Wow. So what's the attraction aside from the enormous financial rewards?
Well, I'll be honest with you, I mean, my expectation on financial rewards is not huge. I mean, if you're investing in startups, the failure rate is likely to be quite high, and a 2 to 4x return after all the tax relief, so perhaps not quite as onerous, would probably be considered very good by many, many people, unless you're really fortunate. Turning to the attractions, from my point of view, it's being involved in really innovative companies at the leading edge of technology that are making new markets based on that technology. And I think, to be frankly in my 60s and to be involved in that, at the front end of innovative thinking with high tech, particularly in a field with AI, I think I feel incredibly privileged and excited.
Excellent. So what's your style as an investor? Are you hands-on?
I'm very much hands-on. I mean, one of my criteria is that I feel I can make a contribution to the company. I chose to be completely focused in the AI sector, and then there were businesses that, B2B type businesses, I considered ones where I could probably make more of a contribution. And I was particularly keen on those that would be selling into the enterprise and or government space, again, because I felt some of my previous skills would help with them.
Excellent. And I mean, typically, what sort of investment do you make? How much do you invest?
I mean, ticket sizes on an individual round will be between £10,000 and £50,000. My largest investments, I'll try and keep money back also to be able to follow on, because I think that is very, very important, since, let's say, round values can go up and down in the early days, and you don't end up getting diluted out, right? On the companies where I'm most heavily invested, my investment does run into six figures.
And John, so what does an attractive investable business look like to you?
It's one where there's a potentially large market, and there's some key market drivers for that market emerging. For instance, regulatory drivers in many jurisdictions, maybe a massive social trend, such as, for instance, mental health issues. That's one thing. The most important thing to me is the motivation of the founders. How invested are they in it? I don't just mean financially, but also emotionally. Is it their sort of life's work? Is it that they perhaps had something that didn't go as well before, a previous startup, and have got a chip on their shoulder and they really want to prove it wrong? Do they really understand the problem they are solving? So founders' motivation is absolutely critical. I would be reluctant to invest in a business with just a single founder. I would expect to see two or three, and I would expect at least one of those to be really deeply expertise in the technology, because the third criteria is that there is a barrier to entry for other players. That might be because of sector knowledge. It might be because of data that's been used to develop the products they've got. Those are probably the two biggest things. So, the barrier to entry is important too.
Okay, so given those points, John, and you talked about the motivation of founders, what would you say are your top three priorities, or maybe even just one or two priorities? What are the things that is absolutely essential for you when looking at an opportunity?
Well, I mean, it's very much absolutely essential is, why are the founders doing it? Do they understand what problem they solve and why? And allied to that is, are they fully committed to the business? It's not just, we've done a few big jobs, got a bit of cash, we're going to start our own startup as we think it'd be funky, and we think we'll be a unicorn in 5 years' time. That doesn't really cut the mustard for me. I'm looking for someone who, if it fails, is really going to take it hard and have a big fall, emotionally and or financially.
Got it.
Right. So as much as anything else, it's about people and their motivations and making sure you've got the right team together, which is, very much from where I come from and what I get involved with. So what does success look like for you, John? What do you deem successful?
I see it as being, for an individual company, it is that company is a sustainable business, i.e. it generates profits and positive cash flow. It has staff in it that are growing with the company and developing and being able to move up as the jobs become bigger within that company as the business grows. And I mean, ultimately, yes, one wants to see an exit at some time, but I personally, that's not mega on my criteria for an individual company. I mean, I know I fly completely in the face of perceived wisdom, but I would be very happy to have invested in a company where I've had a great ride, managed to enjoy my participation in it, and say I got my money back plus a little bit more in dividends over 5-10 years, right? That would be good. Across my portfolio, what success looks like is 2 to 4x on my money over, say, 10, 12 years. Basically. Right. And a few companies that have built into sustainable businesses.
Right. As we all know, things never go according to plan. When are you prepared to bail on an investment, or are you happy to stay on board and ride it to the bitter end?
I mean, I'll be frank, there's very limited opportunity to bail on an investment unless the company's doing quite well. I think with some of my larger investments where I do hold, a few percent of the company, not points of a percent, a few percent, moving in towards 10% or whatever, I think, there would be a consideration of could I sell some and keep some invested if the return was quite good and was going to help me with my overall portfolio objectives.
Right.
Okay, so John, we've talked about the priorities. We've talked about what success looks like. Do you have any kind of a formalized methodology to evaluate the target opportunities when you're looking at organizations, or how does it work?
I don't have a formalized methodology. I mean, out of everything that crosses my desk, frankly, not many warrant a lot more detailed investigation. Just from a pitch deck or an introduction, you can take a crude assessment of do these guys and gals perhaps really have a good handle on what problem they're solving and why that is a problem or will become a problem. And then I think if it ticks that box, then I'd look a little bit further and ask some questions about the maturity of the technology. This comes back to the barriers of entry. And then I would really probe into the founders and their motivations, because that typically takes 2 or 3 meetings. I probably fly against perceived wisdom. I mean, I have a cursory look at the business plan to see if it looked like it's been competently put together. But in my experience, no company ever achieves its business plan.
Yeah. And what happens if you're in a situation where you're looking for other investors or you're raising other monies? Do you get involved in that or not at all?
If I can make some introductions, I will. I don't consider that one of my strong suits. Putting together the deals. I do have opinions on them, which I'm very proactively share. I'm quite pleased that on the companies where I've been following on. The founders come and ask my advice, but I don't sell my black book or think I'm particularly, I've got a differentiated added value in structuring a deal, because I don't think I have. There are people around who I know who are much better at it.
Right. Okay.
And we talked about finding other investors or not, and the ideal opportunities. How do you find the opportunities in the first place? Where do you find them?
But they come from my network. I do have quite a few accountants and lawyers in my network, more from time at Witt, and when also the sale of Aurora was going on, and they seem to have a steady trickle of opportunities, and they're particularly key since what's been interesting is they've seen an increasing number of AI opportunities, particularly a few years ago. I mean, the last year and a half, less so, to be honest. And for them to have an AI person they can refer them to, they view quite positively. That's probably why I don't have to look that wide for deal flow, is that I'm sort of their AI man. And, I'll always, if it's someone who's come from a trusted professional advisor lead, because I don't have that many, right, I'll always see the company for half an hour, at least do a half-hour call with them out of courtesy. And I mean, for what I needed to build up my portfolio, that was more than enough.
Right.
Frankly.
Right. And what about for other would-be investors? What advice would you give them, John?
First thing, most important thing, I know everyone says it, but I can tell you there's loads out there who don't adhere to it, is only invest what you can afford to lose. Okay? So, I mean, I took the sum of money and said, right, I will invest that. Now, I also got advice from one of my sons who's actually in the investment industry, albeit at a completely different level to where I am. And he said, well, Dad, you've got to build up a portfolio, right? So I would say do take a portfolio approach. I mean, I've done about 15 investments in total, which is probably a reasonable number. And the other thing was I didn't do them too wide. I mean, AI is the overall piece, but I mean, I looked at sort of some subsectors. One was online platforms, another, was medical, and a third one was customer profiling and marketing. So, I think you don't want to go, you want to build up a portfolio that don't go at, my advice would be, if you're going to add value to the company, you can't be in too many different vertical market sectors, because you're not going to know enough about that sector to add real value.
Right. So in again, going back to choosing those investments, how would you describe your ideal profile of a founder?
I've got to be careful to be politically correct here. I really do like the younger, really sparky, energized individual who, perhaps not dissimilar to me, could have done better academically, but didn't necessarily, and has really thrown themselves into understanding a market sector, or got involved in that market sector perhaps by having a job, and then seeing, hey, I see this problem here, I'm going to solve it with tech. That is very important to me. Someone who's clearly had to fight in their life at some stage, not someone who's sort of had a very privileged upbringing, paid for education, etc., etc. but someone who really knows how to hustle and has had to hustle and understands the value of money. And someone who can work as a team, so they've perhaps brought in one or two other people that I'd like to see around the table, particularly the technologist, and cut them in to the success of the business and is committed to that.
Excellent.
I like it. That's really good. John, in a few words, without giving away any confidential information, what would you say has been your best investment? How would you describe it?
It's the ones at the most leading. Well, okay, there's two aspects. One is they are commercially viable. And the second is they really are at the leading edges of technology. So there's one that uses face recognition to determine mood, mental well-being, etc. And there's another one which is leading in the identification of hate speech on online forums. And they're not just doing that by text analysis, they're doing that by probing the whole posting history of a poster, the nature of that poster, garnering all the information they can get and running many AI algorithms and fusing them together. So it is really, bleeding edge technology. And in fact, the founders have had many papers published. So it's ones that could have a really good positive impact on society, have got real cutting edge technology. And again, the founding team that supports that with the attributes I'm looking for.
Oh, that's good. So they were the best investments, and that makes a lot of sense. But I guess conversely, there's also been some horrors maybe in your career. It would be really interesting if you wouldn't mind sharing an example for us that comes to mind of how you addressed the situation.
Oh, do you mean horrors in my career or a bad investment?
Well, no. Let's focus on the let's focus on the bad investment. So we've talked about the best investment. Let's talk about ones that maybe with hindsight will probably maybe didn't work out as well as you thought.
Okay, so there was one, and I did go a little bit off piste because it was business to consumer, but it addressed something that I believe is a big problem for families and was a big problem for families when I had a young family, right? It used reasonable amount of AI. I felt that the business was being a little bit extravagant, and I was always counselling the founders to cut back on expenditure. And they had some what I'd call real trophy investors. They had a chairman of the board who was a massive consumer company, and a couple of other non-executives from major household name companies who'd all put in a lot more money than I put in on that occasion, frankly. And I thought, I'm going to go off piste. And it was a bad mistake because the company did go bust. I mean, I think I managed to turn about £35,000 into 296 and 42p. I've still got the check somewhere on the desk. And it was purely, in my view, they just could not keep a lid on expenditure. So I went off piste. I didn't trust I went against my instincts. Bad mistake. So I was a bit sort of swayed by the trophy investors, as I call them.
Right. Well, thank you for your candour on that, John. Obviously, we've spoken about investing, which was our topic for the conversation today. But AI is obviously very much at the forefront of what you do and conversations in general at the moment. I'm intrigued as to what motivated you to write the book U++ on AI, and what's it about AI that you feel hasn't already been said at the moment?
No, I think they're both very pertinent questions. I'm very glad you asked them as well. So over the time I had WIT Consultancy, and Peter mentioned, we did have the privilege to work at quite high level and across some huge global organisations. And I mean, I did WIT for about nearly 20 years. And what I observed was that people in those companies were becoming more and more uneasy and unhappy at work. And then what you had is this thing called AI trundling along that was making them feel even more uneasy. We've heard all the thing about, taking jobs, that sort of thing. And I thought, this is a generation that I'm seeing growing up that sits somewhere between the ages of my children and my grandchildren. And, this is not healthy for society or anybody, really. Now, I'm actually in the camp where I think AI can cause jobs, new industries to be created. And that is what I really talk about, how people can take the opportunity AI will give. The book is targeted at a demographic from late teens through to, say, about 40-ish, maybe a bit younger. And what it advocates is, if you've got a job that's quite routine, look at the other aspects of it. See where you add value through your abstract thinking, your communication and personality, and your soft skills, your critical thinking, etc. And think about how you could change your role to do that. Or, I'm saying to these people, why not start a side hustle? If you've got something you've got real expertise in, it might be, you were a very, very good sportsman at one sport, or, you've got lived experience through, I don't know, substance abuse or something in the family. And, you can add a lot to people. Think about how technology could help you add that to more people and perhaps start a side hustle. So the motivation is very much to say, hey, we're not all on a runway down to being idle and having computers do everything. They're not going to take over the world. Take control of your own destiny, develop your skills that are going to be relevant in this new age.
That's great. That's a great answer, John. Thank you for that. John, there'll be many people listening who, like you, began their career as an individual contributor, and they'll be hearing what you've achieved in your impressive career, and they'll see this as an inspiration. What would you like to tell them?
Firstly, I'm nothing special, right? I am absolutely nothing special. I've always set myself goals, right? And I don't just mean a goal for next week or how much I'm going to earn this month. I tend to take a slightly longer term view, of 6 months to a year, and then probably a 3-year or 5-year view. But I don't get too hung up about the timeline. I say, right, that's the next step. And as I take go on my journey towards them, as long as I'm still going forwards, I don't agonise over it, even if it's not a straight line. One thing I do try really, really hard to do is not take a step backwards. I mean, sometimes you do get forced backwards, that's life, right? But I do have an attitude of I'm not going to willingly take a step backwards. And I think the other thing, which is, it's not for me to say really, is live within your means. I mean, people who are near and dear to me would just say I'm tight, but I do think that's quite important.
That's excellent, thank you, and thank you for being so open and honest there. If you could, what would you, and go back in time, what would you tell your 30-year-old self, and why?
This will make Peter laugh. to be a little bit more understanding and receptive to other people's points of view.
Oh, good answer, John. Good answer. Okay. So I've got another question, John. It's just looking back over your career. We've all got one thing I think that's proved invaluable to us. Do you have one thing that's proved invaluable over this time that you can share with everyone?
Keep learning. That's my honest view is keep learning. It's because I'm learning. Most days I go, the days I work now, when I go to work, I'm learning every day, and that's why I consider myself so fortunate to be at this bleeding edge of technology. But yeah, it's always learning. I mean, we learn from interactions. You talked about my 30-year-old self,
Yeah.
And I'd like to think that now I at least listen to somebody, say I understand before I dismiss their point of view. Whereas perhaps in the past I didn't. So I think, we've all got to keep learning at all levels, the way we deal with people, what we do, the science or whatever the academics are behind it, getting a view on society, learning how to take views on what we see as the perhaps bigger societal drivers going on and where we think they're going to lead society to and how we want to react to that. That's all education, real life education, that I think we should always embrace.
That's great. Great answer, John. Always learning. Thank you. John, it's been a pleasure. It's been really, really informative, really, really insightful. I'd just like to ask you finally, what's next on the agenda?
Well, I'm probably halfway through my career as an investor, to be realistic. They do say that for angel investors, you should think about an 8-year time horizon. Given when I started and then we had COVID and now we've got the higher interest rates, I suspect that's pushed back a bit. So I've probably still got another 5, 6, 7 years for this bit to run its course. And I'll see where we are, at that point. Before the sale of Aurora, when I was up to my elbows in WIT consultancy, which when it was really, really busy with all the banking clients, I'll be honest, I didn't really know what I'd do next, but I knew it would be something different. I think the only thing I can say is that whatever I do next will be very different. Like, I was fortunate to be able to come into investing after a career in sales and consultancy, right, which is very different. And I would want to do something very different again.
Excellent. I think you seem to be one of those people, John, that can't leave it alone. I know that many people, when they come to retirement, they retire and they do a bit of pottering around the garden and all the rest of it. But you seem to still be holding on to that, that final hurrah, if you like. So I'd like to thank you, John, for today.
It's been an absolute pleasure, guys. Absolute pleasure. Good questions, nice probing questions. So I enjoyed answering them.
So thank you to everyone. We'll see you on the next podcast in hopefully 2 weeks' time, when we'll be talking about a chairman's view with someone who's held the role in the past and currently. I hope you've all enjoyed today, and please send us your comments and feedbacks, and feel free to share this podcast with other people. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.